The New Testament was not written by apostles. Hey guys, it's John sitting here in my living room on a wonderful fall day. It's actually in the 60s outside, so it's beautiful. And I'm sitting in here drinking my mug of coffee. The New Testament was not written by apostles. That seems like a very controversial statement. Bible scholars are agreed that the New Testament was written by Greco-Roman Christians somewhere between 70 and 200 years after Jeshua even walked the earth. And the main consensus, the ones who are ideological scholars, the ones who believe in their religion, will make adaptations, or they'll play a game of Twister trying to make sure that it is the apostles. But there is no evidence that in any way, shape, or form that any of the books were written by apostles. And there is a lot of evidence that says that they didn't come for up to 200 years afterwards. But let's play a little game, shall we? Let's say the actual writers of the New Testament were the people that they're ascribed to. 27% of the New Testament is written by Luke. 23% is written by Paul. 20% is written by John. 13% by Matthew. And then it goes down into the single digits, with the last one being Jude at 0.33%. So the majority of the Bible, 70% of it is Luke, Paul, and John of the New Testament. Who's Luke? Was Luke one of the 12? No. Luke was not one of the 12. Luke is known as Paul's companion. Luke is the guy who was teaching Pauline teachings alongside of Paul. So Luke, not an apostle, and was teaching what Paul taught. Right? Get to Paul. Paul never met Jeshua in life, according to his own admission in the book. If we take him at his word in the book, he had a vision of Jeshua on the road to Damascus. He actually made himself an apostle by claiming to be the apostle for the Gentiles. But in the Gnostic Gospels, Jeshua's brother James literally calls Paul the great liar. So it's like you have Luke and Paul being 50% of the New Testament, and neither one of them met Jeshua in life. If these authors are truly them, which I don't 100% believe they are, but so 50% of the New Testament is already written by two people who never met Jeshua. And comes John. Now, if John wrote the book, there's 20% that was written by John. Now, John is the most esoteric book in the Bible. It is the one that is God is love, and perfect love drives out fear, and talks more about a simplicity, but does also very much lean into a very messianic, he's the Messiah kind of ideology. So when I look at that aspect from my past life stuff, I can't believe that the messianic stuff was written by John, because my memories of Jeshua would be completely antithetical to that ideology. When you get down into Mark and the rest, scholars are pretty much agreed that they're actually coming from, the majority of them are coming from one single source text. And so they're saying that these are adaptations from different source texts, but they're claiming these apostle names as the authorship. But Bible scholars are agreed that that's probably not the case. But even those stories tell stories of Jeshua at times when they wouldn't have known him. They tell stories of times, of his birth and all those things, and they wouldn't have known him, so they wouldn't have had those. They would have had been handed down stories from somewhere else. Of course, those stories do embolden the messianic ideologies. So now we're looking at the New Testament from the perspective of it's written by 50% by two people who never met Jeshua in life, 20% by a guy who did know him in life, but the writings don't match the actual teachings. Then you get down to these others, and they're just backing up the stories of the messianic belief. So the New Testament itself is very much skewed, very much a mishmash, but very much leaned into the Paul's teachings. Over 50% of the New Testament is Paul's teachings, with the bulk being coming through Luke, but Luke being Paul's disciple. So when you look at the New Testament, especially, you have to look at it from the perspective of none of this is coming directly from the original people, and it's all hearsay. But it's hearsay with a messianic belief or a messianic agenda. And so the New Testament itself is a massively flawed document. The Old Testament's a massively flawed document. It's actually part of the Torah, but it tells stories of God wiping out whole people and being vengeful and jealous. And all. If you really look at that Old Testament from the perspective of 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, it really tells the story of people of 5,000 years ago. They're big. They didn't have television. They didn't have internet. They didn't have phones. They were just telling these stories. That town got wiped out. Well, God must have done that. They didn't have the information coming into them in that way, so they had no reason to discount or disprove. So all of this stuff is coming from thousands of years ago. And to say in this modern day and age that it's infallible is almost lunacy, because we know within the texts themselves that there's inconsistencies throughout, but we also know that it wasn't written by the people who knew them. So none of these texts can be taken at face value. None of these texts can be taken as true with the logical mind. There are the people who throw away logic and just say, well, I am, simply believing this. That blind adherence to just choosing it to be infallible and ignoring the inconsistencies and ignoring the evidence that it's not from that time period and ignoring the Gnostic texts as not biblical or not valid. I think the Gnostic texts are just as valid as the Bible text, because they're all written in the same time period. The only reason we don't have the Gnostic texts in the Bible is because men said they're not going to go in the Bible. That's the only reason. And now, I spoke to a friend of mine years ago, and I asked him the question, are Gnostic texts as valid as the books that made it in the Bible? He said, no. And I said, why? He says, because I have to believe the hand of God was in the choosing. And I want to say that again. I have to believe. I have to believe. He has to make his faith work. He has to believe God was in the choosing of the books to make his faith work. If he didn't believe it, his faith wouldn't work. He had to believe. He had to choose to believe that the hand of God was in the choosing of the books to make his faith valid. So that to me is right there. There is your escape hatch, right? I can say I believe this because I've chosen to believe it, but none of those other books are written at the same time by some of the same people are valid because God didn't choose those books. And who speaks for God? The men who chose the books. So it really, there's a very big schism in the ideology of the New Testament, the Bible, all of that stuff. And when you look at it from the perspective of, if we could just look at the loving parts of these texts and throw away all the fear-based stuff that's in there, you start to find universal truths with other religions, Buddhism, Hinduism. You start to find universal truths, things that are in all of them. And then you start, though you might be looking at all these other religions, you start to see a simple path of spirituality. You start to see the love one another. You start to see the kindness. You start to see you being the pinpoint of creation with your very thought. It's in all of them. It's in all of them. And so those are the simple teachings of a broader spirituality. But when we have to justify things or come up with I have to believes, then I think you're limiting yourself to the greater greatness of the oneness of everything and the oneness of God and your part in that oneness. And the New Testament is just a bunch of compiled writings. And they don't agree with each other. All the way through the book, they don't agree with each other. 3 versions of the walking on water story, right? God is vengeful and jealous. God is love, right? All those things make no sense, but it really comes down to understanding that none of those things were written, well, in the New Testament especially, were written by the people who it even claims wrote them. They're attributed to those people, but those people had nothing to do with the writing of it. So that's my thought on this. You guys, if you're a Christian and you're really taking it as infallible, I respect that. That's your belief. You're allowed. This is your personal journey. My personal journey is very different from yours. And I respect that. The only thing I care about is, are you loving, are you caring, or are you reaching out to knock other people down for not believing as you do? And then I think your spirituality has failed. If you have to reach out to tell someone else that they're wrong or they're going to burn in hell and all that stuff, then I have to think what a bitter person you are. And my gosh, I really would love you to find the love and compassion that I found in my heart. Because the love and compassion in my heart comes from my simple spirituality. There's a famous story of John the Apostle in his old age in the Gnostic text, which I know is not biblical, right? He's in Ephesus, and he's the last disciple who knew Joshua. And he's sitting there in the room, and they're all at praise, and they're asking him, John, please say something. You were the last one who saw Joshua in life. You were the last one. And John gets up and he dodders to the front, and he says, love one another. And then he turns and he starts to dodder back to his chair. And they say, well, tell us more. Tell us the secret teachings. Tell us about him. Tell us everything. And John turns and says, I can tell you no more until you learn this. The big secret teaching is love one another is the big secret. Just simply be in the present and expressing love. And you have found your way to God. And that's my thought on this. You guys have a great day. And I'll talk to you soon. See you. Bye.